Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 50 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Doesn't seem like 50 episodes, but we've certainly covered a lot of ground in that time. Well, tonight I'm going to cover what may seem to be two very different issues, but at the same time, they have a common denominator. And it's a common denominator which should give us increasing concern about what is happening to the consciousness, to the psyche of the people in this country. I'm going to be discussing Scotland in the first part of the show, and then Syria. And like I said, it may seem that there's no similarity, but what's happening is a polarization. It seems that the days of being able to discuss rationally, to have debate on a subject, are almost over, because the media works on the basis of creating division through forcing people to take what appear to be polarized stances on issues. And basically, once you take a stance, then if somebody takes the opposite stance, then by definition, from that point forward, they are your mortal enemy. And this is extremely dangerous, because if we cannot focus on what unites us and focus on the division, then really what chance do we have of moving forward? So first, Scotland. And this really came to the fore last week after an episode of Fracking Nightmare. Now, it was actually episode 65. So if you did want to go take a look at the episode and see what the fuss is all about, this is the graphic on the YouTube thumbnail. And we were discussing the issue of underground coal gasification. But in the course of the discussion, we made the observation about the duplicity of Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP and the arrangements that she was potentially making with the likes of Jim Ratcliffe, the Chief Executive Officer of INEOS, and his counterpart at Clough Resources, Algie Clough. And we also touched on some of the other aspects that are now starting to unfold in Scotland. And I hinted at the concern that Scotland is not only in danger of becoming a one-party state, but actually in danger of becoming a one-party totalitarian police state. Now, that really set the cat amongst the pigeons, and immediately both I and Mel Kelly, my guest, were accused of being anti-independence, anti-SNP, anti-Nicola Sturgeon. Yet anyone who is a regular viewer of Humanity vs. Insanity will have seen the shows that I did either side of the referendum last year, almost exactly a year ago now, and will know that not only am I pro-Scottish independence, but I offered my counsel as to how the Scottish government might take full advantage to establish their national sovereignty. So to suggest that either I or my guest are anti-independence is just outrageous. Regards the accusation of anti-SNP or anti-Nicola Sturgeon, not at all. The issue that we were discussing was underground coal gasification. And it doesn't matter what your political stance, if you think underground coal gasification is going to have any benefits for the people of Scotland, then unfortunately you're falling for a very, very narrow narrative, quite possibly one that's put out by the industry. So after these attacks, Mel and I and Pippa King, who has also been doing a lot of work into what's unfolding in Scotland, have decided that we need to come to Scotland and hold a special one-off event in Glasgow. And the event is going to be called Fracked, Tracked and Hacked. And the subtitle of the event is Scotland Becoming a Totalitarian Police State? Now, I know that there's a lot of people who are going to say this is outrageous and how can we make such an observation? Well, many people ask, how is it that Hitler managed to get away with his agenda and deceive the good people of Germany back in the 1930s? Well, what's occurring in Scotland right now would in some ways perhaps have been Hitler and Goebbels' wet dream. Let me just show you a short promo video that is based on a suspect tracking system that is now fully integrated into the NICE surveillance system that has been implemented in Glasgow. And Glasgow is designated as the guinea pig for the UK's first smart city. Take a look at this.
If you need to locate the owner of this unattended baggage, you'd best hope it's not here. If this child were lost, it would be easy to find him here. But what if it was here? Or here? Or here? These are situations in which locating your target within minutes is essential. With NICE Suspect Search, the next generation video search and track application, you can do it easily. Instead of watching hours of video, it presents you with the relevant images, so you can run the search across a vast number of security cameras and locations to find a person of interest within minutes and automatically track their route on a map. Enhancing situational awareness, enabling immediate response, and expediting forensic searches, NICE Suspect Search can help you reduce your search time from hours to minutes. NICE Suspect Search, when time is of the essence.
It was Benjamin Franklin who said, "Those who sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither." Now, Glasgow has taken over from London as being the most surveilled city in Europe. And in fact, Glasgow has the largest control room managed both jointly by Police Scotland and Glasgow City Council. Well, some of the other aspects that we will be addressing. Pippa will be talking about RFID, biometrics, as well as the surveillance systems that are being introduced in Scotland, underpinned by an Israeli security company. Mel Kelly will be addressing not only underground coal gasification, but the tragedy of Nicola Sturgeon agreeing with David Cameron to relinquish sovereignty on Scottish water rights. And then I should be looking at the other issues that are coming to the fore in Scotland, like the state guardian for every child in Scotland, the health database on every child in Scotland, which is going to be maintained outside of Scotland. Police Scotland being armed, a higher percentage of armed police than any other police force in the country. Random stop and search. The statistics in Police Scotland are much higher than any other police force in the UK. And recently introduced random drug tests of young people lining up outside of clubs. I mean, this is an incredible breach of civil liberties, regardless of your attitude towards drug use or abuse. Police Scotland spying on journalists, and journalists receiving effectively lifetime bans on reporting on anything that challenges the Scottish government. So you still think that an independent Scotland, the way it's going, is a good thing? Like I said, I, Mel and Pippa, we are all pro-Scottish independence. But the people of Scotland need to know what it is that the government that they have in power is actually planning to unleash. As expected in May of 2016, if the SNP take a landslide in the Scottish elections, at the moment, of course, they have 50% of the seats in the Scottish Parliament. If they take a landslide, then not only is Scotland likely to lift its moratorium on unconventional gas, but it will accelerate the journey into totalitarianism. So that's Scotland. That's the Glasgow event at the Thistle Hotel on Sunday, the 27th of September. It'll run from 11 a.m. in the morning till 6 in the evening. It'll be a workshop because we'll also be looking at ways in which communities around Scotland can challenge this unfolding agenda. More details are on my website, and that's ianrcrane.com. And you can also obviously book advance tickets there as well. So that's Scotland. So now, Syria. And once again, we're going to look at this polarisation of opinion. So in Scotland, basically, you're either pro-SNP, pro-Nicola Sturgeon, or you're not. And there doesn't appear to be any latitude for the grey area in between. And what is unfolding now right across the UK is a very similar attitude towards what is occurring in Syria. And of course, the media is playing its role. So, let me lay my cards on the table. This is not a black and white issue. There are many tragic elements to the whole unfolding situation in the Middle East, and we will only scratch the surface on some of those this evening. But there's also some manipulation going on, and many people are simply falling for that manipulation and simply going over to one side of the argument or to the other without acknowledging the many complex issues that are related to this. So, what's occurring right now, of course, the media is just outrageous, and we'll look at some of this as we go through the discussion. So, almost exactly 2 years ago, David Cameron was trying to get Parliament to support him for an attack on President Assad and the Syrian forces. Now, he lost that debate by the very narrow margin of just 13 votes. So the reality is, if just 7 MPs had voted differently, then David Cameron would have got his mandate to unleash an attack on President Assad and the Syrian army. And of course, this was all based on the trumped-up allegation that Syrian forces had released some chemical weapons upon the civilian population. The reality was, and most commentators 2 years on agree with this analysis, is that sadly chemical weapons were unleashed on the civilian population, but those chemical weapons were released by the rebel forces, now recognized as ISIS or ISIL. And it seems that those chemical weapons were supplied by Saudi Arabia, but unfortunately they didn't include the instructions, and there was a tragic accident, and so the chemical weapons were unleashed upon the civilian population, which the Western media took it upon themselves to blame on Assad. Now, Obama was looking for David Cameron to get the mandate to attack Assad so that he could simply go to Congress and say, see, the Brits have agreed to this, so therefore you've got to support me in this. Well, it didn't happen. So over the ensuing 12 months, there's little doubt that the rebel MPs who voted against David Cameron were all schmoozed or threatened, so that when the vote came up again the following August, in August of 2014, then the vote did go in his favour. But this time, allegedly, it was to attack ISIS. And here we see here the bombing against ISIS to start in hours as MPs back the new Iraq war. So in the space of 12 months, David Cameron had moved from wanting to unleash an attack on Assad to wanting to unleash an attack on ISIS. Well, of course, it wouldn't surprise anybody if David Cameron, and certainly his manipulators, not least the arms industry, were really quite happy for David Cameron to switch sides with a remarkable degree of regularity, because there is one hell of a lot of money in the arms industry. So this is actually from an article published in The Independent, so matter of public record. Blood money. The UK's 12.3 billion arms sales to repressive states. Well, I'm glad it says repressive states, because Israel takes nearly $7.9 billion worth of arms. So the reality is that about 60% of the UK arms sales that go to repressive states go to Israel. And the rest, are generally spread, around, much of it is spread around the Middle East. Some to Pakistan, some to China, some into Russia, some to Iran even, Afghanistan, but the bulk here in the Middle East area. So the arms industry, they can't even blame Victor Boot anymore, of course, because he's wallowing in a US jail. So the reality is that this is officially sanctioned arms sales. And this is how the arms industry, of course, makes its money, keeps its stock price high by fueling conflict. So David Cameron, over the course of a couple of years, really can't decide whether or not he wants to bomb Assad or bomb ISIS. Well, he's not the only one that seems to be a little bit confused, because let me show you a short clip from a video that has been doing the rounds on YouTube over the last few weeks. This is an extract from a speech by Obama given on the 7th of July, that date again, 7/7 of 2015. So take a look at this.
So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar province. So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar province.
And yes, he didn't repeat himself. You did see it play out twice, just to make sure you heard it correctly. And in that speech, that's the clip, Obama clearly states that he has authorized the training of ISIL. And this is being presented as de facto evidence that the US is behind ISIS, which certainly I would suggest that there's more than this to support that assertion. But let's actually take a look at a little bit more of that speech, because as you will see in the course of the speech, he can't actually make up his mind who he does support.
Meanwhile, we continue to ramp up our training and support of local forces that are fighting ISIL on the ground. As I've said before, this aspect of our strategy was moving too slowly, but the fall of Ramadi has galvanized the Iraqi government. So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar province. So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar province. More Sunni volunteers are coming forward. Some are already being trained, and they can be a new force against ISIL. We continue to accelerate the delivery of critical equipment, including anti-tank weapons to Iraqi security forces, including the Peshmerga and tribal fighters. And I made it clear to my team that we will do more to train and equip the moderate opposition in Syria. Now, all this said, our strategy recognizes that no amount of military force will end the terror that is ISIL, unless it's matched by a broader effort.
So, was it a slip of the tongue? Was it a Freudian slip? Obama reads from a script. The reality is that this guy does not have the capacity to make any observation or comment without a script. So either the script writer got it wrong, or it was deliberate so that the listener would hear precisely what they wanted to hear. If they wanted to hear that Obama was supporting Assad, they would hear that. If they wanted to hear that he was supporting ISIL, they would hear that. The reality is that he is most likely, along with the Brits and the Israelis, to some extent supporting both, just fueling the conflict, just like they were during the Iran-Iraq war of 1982 to 1988, which eventually ended primarily when both the Iranians and the Iraqis realized that they were effectively being set up to knock 7 barrels of hell out of each other by the same people. Oliver North, of course, had a lot to do with that. So, or there is another alternative, because any regular viewers of my presentations over the years will know that one of the beliefs of those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom have to tell us what it is they're going to do. because they believe that by telling us what it is that they are going to do and then we not reacting, that is effectively their mandate to pursue their agenda. Which of course comes back to the point that I make in pretty much every single presentation, that it is up to us to stop this, to bring about an end to this obscenity of war. Now, the whole arena has been hyped over the last literally few days with the publication of this. Now, I think we've all seen that, so let's take that off screen. This is an incredibly tragic picture, and consider it a possibility that this is part of the manipulation process, the psychological manipulation process. Because look at how many children have been murdered by the Israelis on their attacks on Gaza and the West Bank over the last X number of years. Does that get the British or the American people or other people in Europe motivated to organize a mass evacuation of the populations of Gaza or the West Bank? No. But this tragic photograph gets published in the media, and all of a sudden the media goes into overdrive. And this, probably the most outrageous headline that I've seen in the British media for a long time. And of course, this is the Murdoch press, the extreme right-wing Zionist Rupert Murdoch, publishing this on the front of the Sun on Sunday. Exclusive poll. 52 say bomb Syria now for Alan. Well, sadly, Alan doesn't get an opportunity to have a say in this. But do we really think that bombing the crap out of the civilian population of Syria, regardless of which side, is going to ease this problem? I mean, how obscene, how absurd can it get? Well, obviously it can get even more absurd, because blitz them to hell. Imagine this headline in a Russian publication or an Iranian publication. There would be absolute outrage. But Rupert Murdoch can publish this in the UK, in the UK's biggest selling comic, and say, blitz them to hell. Well, not in my name, and not in the name of anybody that I have spoken to. And that 52% that say bomb Syria now, where was that poll taken? Outside the gates of Lockheed Martin or one of the other arms manufacturers? I mean, this is just outrageous. But of course, it continues. Pull the trigger. Pull the trigger. So blitz them to hell, pull the trigger. Rupert Murdoch, and anybody who's working for The Sun, then unfortunately you have descended into the realm of socio-psychopathy. And the fact that you even have the audacity to consider yourself part of humanity is simply an outrage. These polls were published. Would you support or oppose Britain playing a greater role in bringing an end to the war in Syria? Well, of course, that's a very leading question, because there are various ways in which you can bring about an end to the war in Syria. And one of them is to stop providing armaments to either of the protagonists. But, 52% support Britain playing a greater military role in bringing an end to the war. Well, I guess that the clue is in the word military. And sadly, it's 52%. But again, probably taken outside the gates of an arms manufacturer. 22% oppose, 26% either don't know or really don't care. Another poll. Do you think Britain should admit new refugees fleeing the war in Syria? 36% yes. So we've got two elements to this. On one hand, Rupert Murdoch is saying, yes, we need more military involvement. On the other hand, we've got the poll saying, yes, we need to allow an influx of refugees. Now, it's extremely important that we reflect on the terminology that is being used in the media. And in fact, in those Sun articles, the terms are once again conflated. Both terms are used, and of course the terms are migrants and refugees. And the two are not necessarily totally separate. But refugees relates, of course, to people trying to get out of a country where they are effectively in danger, either by war or because of philosophical beliefs. But to stay there is life-threatening. Migrants, on the other hand, are those who effectively choose, primarily to enhance their economic situation, to move from one country to another. So let's separate the two. But let's also acknowledge that this situation that is occurring in the Middle East is entirely of our making. And, well, we can start, of course, with, we can go back to the early part of the 20th century, because we could argue that it started with the Balfour Treaty, the commitment that Balfour and Milner gave to the Zionists, that in return for bringing America into the First World War, then Britain would help the Zionists establish the state of Israel. Now, I'm sure that when that agreement was written, it was rather casually proposed or dismissed as something that was unlikely to happen. But of course, the Zionists never forgot it and held the British to account. And of course, then we have the creation of Israel in 1948, after a horrendous campaign of terror unleashed by the Zionist guerrillas against the British forces in what was then Palestine. So since then, the Zionists have been on their quest to ethnically cleanse not only Palestine, but also what they perceive to be their rightful inheritance, i.e. Greater Israel. And we'll see that in a second, a bit later. Now, late last week, I should say, I was actually accused in a conversation, and I quote, of being a nutty conspiracy theorist. Now, me, can you imagine that being levelled at me? No, I know, incredible, isn't it? But fortunately, I had the article that I was referring to on my phone. And what led to that accusation being made was the statement that I made that the British were providing armaments and training to ISIS. Well, once I showed this particular individual this article, which appeared in The Guardian in June, his jaw hit the floor. And I'll just quote the first two paragraphs. The prosecution of a Swedish national accused of terrorist activities in Syria has collapsed at the Old Bailey after it became clear Britain's security and intelligence agencies would have been deeply embarrassed had the trial gone ahead. His lawyers argued that British intelligence agencies were supporting the same Syrian opposition groups as he was, and were party to a secret operation providing weapons and non-lethal help training to the groups, including the Free Syrian Army. Well, that pretty much nailed that argument. But you see, I also went on to suggest that Israel was also involved. And that, of course, got a similar reaction. But then I was able to show him this. This is from Israel Today. And this is from a couple of years ago. Israeli hospital treats Syrian rebel fighters. So what a shame they don't provide or apply the same level of compassion to the Palestinians that they bomb the hell out of on a regular basis. Here's the article from Israel Today. Israel on Saturday came to the rescue of 7 Syrian nationals found wounded along the border fence in the Golan Heights. The men turned out to be Syrian rebel fighters who were injured in clashes with government forces. One of the men was found in critical condition with shrapnel wounds to his abdomen. He and several of the others underwent surgery at Ziv Hospital in the northern Israel city of Safed overnight. All 7 are listed in stable condition. though the most badly wounded is still in intensive care ward. An Israeli Defense Ministry spokesman said that despite the official state of war between Israel and Syria, these men asked for humanitarian aid and we provided it. Well, an official state of war between Israel and Syria, but these were the rebels, admitted by the Israeli media here. So they were actually providing support for the rebels, for ISIL, who were trying to bring down Assad. By the way, just to explain, ISIL stands for Islamic State in the Levant. The Levant, of course, is the name for the entire region. Then we have this literally from a couple of weeks ago. The Times of Israel, critically injured Syrian transferred to Israeli hospital. In first such evacuation since fatal June attack on ambulance carrying 2 wounded fighters, a man in his 20s was airlifted for treatment. The article went on, Israel routinely takes in and treats Syrians injured in the civil war. And the IDF has set up a field hospital along the border, though it transports more serious cases to hospitals elsewhere in the country. And then it goes on to say, without prejudice to which side of the civil war the injured was fighting on. Well, I'm not sure that we're ever going to see the statistics, but call it a hunch. But I would suggest that the number of pro-Assad wounded treated by the Israelis is not a very large number versus the number of rebels, because the goal here is to remove Assad. It has been that goal all along, despite the fact that we know that William Hague was advised way back in 2011 that the removal of Assad would condemn the Christian community in Syria to death. They knew this, absolutely, without any shadow of doubt. Yet Assad, being from the Alawite minority himself, the Assad family have maintained peace in the country by providing, if you like, a secular state where all faiths are recognized. Unlike, of course, the alleged, and I say alleged, philosophy of ISIL. Yet, of course, there was a French hostage recently who was released. He'd been held hostage by ISIL for over a year, and he made the observation that there was never a Quran in sight. He claimed that they were no more Islamic than he was. So what's really going on? Well, call it a hunch. But I would say that ISIL, the forces trained and supported by the US, the UK and Israel, are doing an extremely effective surrogate job of ethnic cleansing. What they are doing is they are effectively creating greater Israel. The dream of Theodor Herzl, the founding father of Zionism. It's a construct. It's a political construct. Zionism is an extremist, religio-political organization that will clearly stop at nothing to achieve its goal. And its goal is the ethnic cleansing, not just of Palestine, but of the entire region. And anybody who is in any doubt about that should read the excellent book by the Israeli historian Ilan Pappé, who was actually a lecturer not too far away from here at Exeter University, and a book he wrote a number of years ago called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. So this image has been abused by the media to create the fervour to bring about a further attack on the population of Syria, claiming that the attacks will be on ISIS. But I think that what they tell the British public and the American public and what actually happens in reality might be two very, very different things. Why would they attack ISIS when the British Special Forces reportedly have specialists embedded in the ISIS forces to provide training? No. So telling the British public one thing and doing another. Where have we heard that before? Meanwhile, of course, this image, this tragic image, has also been used to fuel the debate on rebranding immigration. And I'm not making light of the tragic refugee issue. It is of our creation, and clearly we must participate in finding a solution. But let's avoid becoming polarized. You know, we have to be mature. We have to step beyond the social media construct of literally forcing people against either this wall or this wall and nothing in between. And anybody in between clearly doesn't have the intellectual capacity to come to a decision. No, those who stand in between have the intellectual capacity to recognize the complexity of the issue and realize that this isn't something that can be argued black and white. Now, just to remind you, and we have discussed this before, let's recall that there is a stated EU agenda to destroy national homogeneity in the EU. This is from Peter Sutherland. The interview that he gave was, once again, on a memorable date, the 21st of June 2012. And here's the BBC report. EU should undermine national homogeneity, says UN Migration Chief. The EU should do its best to undermine the homogeneity of its member states, the UN Special Representative for Migration has said. Bear in mind that Peter Sutherland, who is Irish by accident at birth, is also the architect for the destruction of the Irish economy and is working hard to undermine Irish homogeneity, to turn Ireland into a multicultural state. And he's not singling Ireland out because the objective is to do this right across the EU. Because this is the way these sociopaths believe that the EU can effectively then establish its dominion over nation states. Peter Sutherland told peers the future prosperity of many EU states depended on them becoming multicultural. He also suggests that the UK government's immigration policy has no basis on international law. Well, his argument is that basically all borders should be open. And I know that's a very popular view, particularly amongst the left wing. But the reality is that, again, it's not black and white. Peter Sutherland made this observation. He said, we still nurse a sense of our homogeneity and difference from others. And that's precisely what the European, in my view, should be doing its best to undermine. Well, Peter Mandelson, he of the dark forces, made this statement. This is from a couple of years ago now. Immigrants, he said, we sent out search parties to get them to come and made it hard for Britons to get work. Labour sent out search parties for immigrants to get them to come to the UK. Lord Mandelson has admitted in a stunning confirmation that the Blair and Brown governments deliberately engineered mass immigration. The former cabinet minister and spin doctor said New Labour sought out foreign workers. He also conceded that the influx of arrivals meant the party's traditional supporters are now unable to find work. Of course, this is driving them, understandably, into the hands of Jeremy Corbyn. The article continues. By contrast, Labour leader Ed Miliband has said his party got it wrong on immigration, but has refused to admit that it was too high under Labour. Between 1997 and 2010, net immigration to Britain totalled more than 2.2 million, more than twice the population of Birmingham. The annual net figure quadrupled under Labour from 48,000 people in 1997 to 198,000 by 2009. Mass immigration. Meanwhile, the greed is good philosophy of the global corporatists works on the principle of not of any social responsibility, but literally getting people to work for the lowest possible wage. It is because of mass immigration that the vast majority of people in this country are basically earning a wage that is below what is regarded as a living wage. Bearing in mind that the minimum wage is considered to be some 60% below the living wage. So £6.50, soon to be raised by a massive 30 pence to £6.80, is the minimum wage. And in addition to this, we have the abomination of 0 hours contracts. And the reason I say this is not black and white is because by bringing masses of immigrants in. And who can blame them for coming here when you open the doors? Because if somebody can earn 7, 8, 9 times in a week what they could earn in their home country, wouldn't you make the effort to go abroad? You know, we are talking about somebody having the opportunity to, say, become a bus driver and earn the equivalent of £250,000 in terms of purchasing power in this country. Because that's the reality. That's what's on offer here. But unfortunately, what is happening here is that people are being effectively played. They're being played to open up the immigration channels through the back doors here. So we have to find a solution to the refugee issue as well as to the migrant issue. And both, of course, come to a head with the immigration issue. Add to this the fact that for a nation to sustain itself, the birth rate needs to be at least 2.2. 2.2 children per family. In the UK, the indigenous population now has a birth rate, as do many other European nations, below 2. Whereas the immigrant population have a birth rate of closer to 3. So look at the longer term implications here. It is not a one-dimensional issue. It requires debate. It requires discussion. It requires compassion. It requires humanity, and fundamentally, it requires the socio-psychopaths to stop blitzing nations, developing nations, third world nations, and forcing these people to get out of the country for fear of their lives. Well, what can one say? You know, we're coming to a very unique period, depending on your belief system. On the 23rd of this month, we have the Shemitah. Now, whether or not you give credence to the belief system that suggests that the Shemitah, which is the 360-day cycle, which actually kicks off on September the 23rd and runs through to September the 28th. There's a lot of fear-mongering being put out on the web amongst the alternative community, but actually there is nothing to be concerned about. The reality is that we are continuing in this period of massive change, and the alternative media has a very, very significant role to play. I think anyone watching UK Column News earlier today, or watching it after this episode of Humanity vs Insanity is finished, will see Mike and Brian discussing how the BBC are proposing they effectively take control of all regional news. So once again, ensuring that the establishment pumps out its bullshit into the masses, whereas the alternative media is attracting an increasing audience as more and more people are starting to realise that you have the responsibility for your own version of reality, not a version of reality that's pumped out by the establishment or by the mainstream media. So don't take anything that I've said either tonight or ever said at face value. It's not the purpose of what I do. All I'm trying to do is stimulate your own curiosity, stimulate your own humanity. And once we achieve this, then we have a real chance of shutting down the insanity of the global corporatists and their socio-psychopathic agenda. So the Shemitah, the presentation is going to be in Hull, at Truth Juice Hull, on the night of Wednesday, 23rd of September. I'm looking forward to what unfolds over the next few months. Unfortunately, I also know it's going to be an extremely rocky ride, but the rockier it gets, the more people will realise that they have to get involved. If we're going to change this, it's going to take all of us to get involved. Thanks for joining me.